As a former child actor, I uncovered a dark Hollywood secret: the true origin of the Wilhelm Scream. I'm sure you have all heard the Wilhelm Scream. You may not have heard of it, but you almost definitely would have heard the scream itself. It often rears its head in some of our most popular movies. It makes an appearance in the Star Wars films, and it even appears in The Lord of the Rings. The now famous "ah" sound is now deeply ingrained in our movies and our culture, that a lot of people know the sound, but they probably don't know how or when it originated. Its first use was in the 1951 movie titled Distant Drums. But what if it didn't actually originate from that film? What if the scream actually had a lot darker origin? Quite a number of years ago now, I was a young actor and I actually managed to appear in a few feature films. I was only around the age of 9 when my acting career was in its prime. I had been a supporting actor in 3 quite well-known movies and was on track to becoming a household name. It was on the set of my 4th film that everything changed. I lost my career because of what I discovered, and worse, I lost my innocence. I won't say the name of the film that I was working on when I discovered this secret, but I will say that it was one of those generic family comedies that was filled with a couple of big-name actors. I was cast in the role of the youngest son in the quirky family, and this was the movie that was supposed to launch me into stardom. I was already recognizable, and most people would probably know who I was if they saw me, but no one really knew my name, and this was the movie that was supposed to change that. I had only been on set for 3 days and had only shot 1 complete scene when it happened. The day that I found the tape. I can't remember exactly what Stan's job was on set, but I had seen him running around set each day that I was there. He always had his hands full and would be doing a quick little half jog to deliver whatever he was holding to the right person. I don't think I ever saw him without a script or a prop in his hands, and I didn't ever see him when he wasn't out of breath from the endurance run he would have to do around set. The other thing I remember about Stan was that he was notoriously forgetful. You would often see him run across set, stop midway to his destination, turn around, and then when he would reappear, he would be holding something extra that he had forgotten about. I later found out that Stan had actually been fired from a previous film for forgetting to take a movie script with him, and he left it sitting on a table in a busy coffee shop. That's the sort of man he was, forgetful but also hardworking. I liked Stan, and one thing I do recall is his warm smile and his kind words that he would say to me whenever he would see me on set. On the 3rd day I was on set, just after filming had wrapped, I saw Stan jog through the set, down a small corridor that was in the studio, and enter a small room that joined onto the corridor. My parents were always on set with me, but I saw that they were busy with a producer, so I decided to follow Stan to this small room. I don't really know why I followed him. I didn't know him that well, but something about him made me feel comfortable, and so I decided that I would go and say goodbye to him before I left the studio that day. I walked down the small corridor and entered the room that I had seen Stan enter. He was no longer inside. My immediate thought was that he had forgotten something and so had left to retrieve it, and that he would be back here soon. I decided to wait in the room and await his inevitable return. I looked around the room and saw a large number of television screens. The screens were stacked 4 high and were also 4 across, 16 screens in total. There also appeared to be some sort of control desk located just underneath the large collection of monitors. Me, being only 9 years old at the time, became interested in the amount of expensive equipment in front of me, and so walked over to the desk and sat down in the single chair that was living in front of the desk. On the desk was a number of video players and what appeared to be some sort of editing equipment. In front of one of the video players, there was just one black tape. I guess I just assumed that maybe it was a tape from that day's shooting, or maybe a tape from a previous day. I remember picking it up, looking at the front of it, and seeing a small piece of masking tape stuck to the front. Written on the white piece of masking tape in thin black marker was the word, Wilhelm. I didn't know what this meant, and it didn't seem to relate to the movie that we were filming. Curious, I decided to insert the tape into the video player, and once I did, static appeared on the screen for a moment before a video began to play. The video that started to play was shot in black and white, and the footage was quite grainy. It looked like it had been filmed a number of years ago. The video depicted a shirtless man that was tied to a chair, his face filled with terror and pain. It started by focusing on this bound man, but then a voice came from off camera. "Okay, Wilhelm, we are going to try this one more time," the faceless voice said. It was a higher-pitched, nasally voice that seemed to be excited about something, as he was speaking quite enthusiastically. "And action," the voice said, still from off-camera. Just as he said the word, action, there was a loud crack, and the man tied to the chair let out a loud howl of pain. I don't think my 9-year-old self knew exactly what had happened, but now when I think back to the tape, I realize that the man bound in the chair had been whipped. The man's scream will forever be ingrained into my mind. It was a scream of intense pain and suffering. It didn't last long, but the intensity of the scream is something that I wish I never heard. Obviously though, the scream wasn't intense enough for the faceless voice, as once the man finished screaming, he said, "No, no, no. That is simply not good enough, Wilhelm, I know it, you know it, and the audience is going to know it. I want a scream of someone in real pain, in real terror. A scream that will live on in infamy, and you are going to give it to me." Again. Another crack could be heard, and once again, the man in the chair, who it seemed was called Wilhelm, let out another scream of pain, this time louder than the previous one. It was still not good enough though, as the man off camera soon explained. "That was better, Wilhelm, it really was, but still, it is just not quite good enough. You need to dig deep and give me a proper scream. Imagine you are in pain, you are suffering, which in your case should be quite easy to do. You need to turn to your animalistic instincts and give me a ferocious, primal scream. I know you can do it, you just need to dig deep." Again. The voice said again, this time sounding slightly agitated, but still excited. This time after the word, "Agan," was spoken, there wasn't another loud, crack sound. Instead I saw something swiftly cross the screen, and then suddenly a large slash appeared across Wilhelm's chest. Blood began to form along the large gash and then started to run down his chest and towards his lap. Wilhelm let out his loudest scream yet, a scream of pure pain, which could curdle the blood of anyone that heard it. I know that it certainly sent shivers down my spine. When Wilhelm finished his scream, he began to sob, but still didn't say anything. Again, the only one speaking was the enthusiastic voice from behind the camera. "You're almost there, Wilhelm, almost. You are so close, but there is something not quite right. This scream is the conclusion to my masterpiece, so it needs to be haunting, confronting and memorable. I can guarantee that if you manage to produce the scream that I want, then you will be known, you will be famous, and that's what you want, isn't Wilhelm?" I heard the voice say. Wilhelm didn't answer the question that had just been asked of him, but instead, he continued to sob, possibly out of fear but mainly in pain. He sat in the chair, ropes tied around his wrists and ankles, his head facing down towards his lap, where his blood was beginning to pool. The voice spoke again, this time only saying one word. "Action." As soon as the word left his mouth, I saw something blur across the screen. The blur turned out to be an arrow that flew across the screen and found itself wedged into Wilhelm's chest, right near his heart. Wilhelm let out one final scream before his lifeless body slumped forward in the chair. He let out the familiar, sound of the now famous, Wilhelm scream. Once Wilhelm had finished his dying scream, the faceless voice had just one more word to say, "Perfect." After the final word had been spoken, static once again returned to the screen. The tape had finished and younger me was left staring at the screen, unsure of how to process exactly what I had just seen. "You weren't supposed to see that, kid," a voice from behind me said. I quickly spun myself around, unsure of who was behind me. Unsure of what they would do to me because of what I had just uncovered. I turned around and saw the familiar, sweaty face of Stan. He was looked down at me, a look of worry spread across his face. "I am really sorry that you had to see that. I knew that I shouldn't have just left the tape lying around," Stan said apologetically. He seemed sincere and it seemed that he wasn't going to cause me any harm from what I had just witnessed. I didn't know what to say back to him and so I opted to remain silent. Stan spoke again. "I guess another person now knows the true origin of the scream. Not many know it and they are trying their best to keep it that way. I didn't exactly know who they was, but it seemed that a number of people were aware of the true origin of the scream, and they definitely didn't want that secret getting out. Somehow, though, a 9-year-old had stumbled across this dark secret. I stayed silent for a moment longer before I managed to ask one question. If that was real, then why would they keep using that sound in movies? I managed to as Stan. Well, that's the funny thing about the Wilhelm scream. No one actually includes it into their movies. It just appears. No one knows that their movie is going to include that horrible sound until the premiere of the film. It's just there, in the middle of the film. Some think it is someone in editing inserting it into the film, but not me, I have my own theory. I think it is Wilhelm's final call for help. His final plea to be heard. He devoted his life to a film and so he wants to be recognized for it. He is making himself heard and is making himself a star. Of course, that is just my theory. I don't think anyone really knows exactly why it appears in so many movies, but that's just what I like to think. After that, I was promptly fired from the movie. I guess word must have gotten out that I now knew the truth behind the scream. And I guess they thought I knew too much. I never recovered from that firing, and my career as an actor was now a thing of the past. I have lived with the truth for many years, but I believe that it is now time to share what I know. I want others to know. I want Wilhelm to receive the acknowledgement he deserves. He did, after all, give his life for the sound. The 12th of January 15, 1:23 p.m. I am packing up my stuff and headed to my mom's for a couple days. We just had it out for another 10 minutes about how can she expect me to believe anything she says if she won't even let me check her phone. She simply said I guess you can't. About as close to full confession I will get it seems. On a positive note, well maybe negative note. I am so appreciative of all the advice and support from this community. It really has kept me strong and focused on the goal at hand and I feel because of you I have went about this much better than I would have without you. Broke my cherry. Could also get a front page out of this. So close haha. Not that it matters. When I posted this I was simply looking for a couple people to share my pain and be with me all night as I knew I wasn't going to sleep which I am still wide awake. I am going to talk to my mom and see if the lawyer she is using for her current divorce, the irony, is someone I would want to deal with. I will continue to be here for everyone sharing their stories as much as I am glad you came to read mine. Look forward to talk to you all and I especially appreciate all the PMs. A lot of them were very useful and full of amazing advice. The 12th of January 15, 4 p.m. I went for a drive the last hour and a half. More so sitting in a parking lot trying to close my eyes and forget the world. Didn't work. This has been so overwhelming with all the support. Can't believe this blew up on this level to get to the front page. So many of us out there have went through something similar to what I am going through and I feel for you. I do. This pain is something I wish on no one. Hopefully if you are reading this and have been through something similar or are going through it now as well. I recommend reading as much of these comments as possible. They have been more than helpful to me since last night when posting this. Right now it looks like me and my wife are done as she drew the last straw with not allowing me to be able to see her phone. It was something simple to maybe help me see why they were talking the way they were but it looks like it would have ended up being more proof. Thanks again to everyone. I am going to try to nap now and will try to get on and post an update whenever I have one. Forever grateful as you helped guide me in the right direction of probably the most important decision of my life. January 13, 15, 1:37 a.m. She basically stayed in our room all day and just came down to talk. She openly told me everything that she knew. She said that they have been emotionally having a relationship for a couple months now. It all started at work when they just started mutually agreeing on things and then a sex joke was told by a coworker which opened up them talking about sex. They would compare their marriages and the problems they have which obviously would bring them closer. The reason she wouldn't show me her phone is because there were text messages of them saying to each other that they want to have sex. I really can believe everything she is saying. It is just the kicker that they both send those two snaps basically saying they have already had sex. I really am so torn because even if there wasn't a physical relationship there, the emotional level was there and apparently she said if they weren't married, they would have already done it. She also tells me that she was ready to break it off knowing it was going too far. I find this very hard to believe but she seemed to be telling the truth. Really don't know what else to say right now but FML. The bone fairy. Everyone has heard of the tooth fairy. Whenever you would lose a tooth when you were younger and so you would place it under your pillow and eagerly await the dollar you would find under your pillow the next morning. Only to be disappointed that when you found out that the tooth fairy gave your rich friend more money than you. But at least the tooth fairy works on the system of give and take. She takes your lost tooth and in exchange she gives you some money. The bone fairy doesn't work like this, however. The bone fairy just takes. Like you, I had never heard of the bone fairy until a few weeks ago. My 6-year-old daughter, Lily, first mentioned the fairy when she came home from school one day. "Dad, is it true that I will soon lose my baby bones?" she asked me, her eyes filled with worry. "What do you mean your baby bones?" I replied, unsure of what she meant. "Well, it's just that Rebecca at school was telling me about the bone fairy." She said that it comes to visit you while you are asleep, and it takes your bones home with them. So, I know that the tooth fairy takes my baby teeth, so the bone fairy must take my baby bones. I had never heard about the bone fairy before, so my first thought was that it was something that Rebecca must have made up or something that she had heard from someone else. So, I reassured Lily that the bone fairy won't visit her and take any of her bones. I also explained to her that there aren't any baby bones, but the bones you are born with are the same ones that you will always have. This seemed to comfort her, and I saw the worry begin to leave her eyes as she began to understand that she would be safe from the bone fairy. The rest of the night continued as normal. My wife, Lily and I all ate dinner together, we watched a little bit of television, and before long it was time for Lily to go to bed. I helped her get ready and then read a short bedtime story, and then it was time to turn the lights out. Just as I turned the light off and darkness took over the bedroom, I heard Lily's small voice say to me, "Dad, if the bone fairy does come, you will protect me, won't you?" she said to me. I couldn't see her that well, but I could just tell by her voice that she was still a bit afraid, and so she needed some comfort and reassurance from me. "Of course, darling," I replied, "I will protect you from everything that you are scared of." I bent down and gave her a small kiss on the forehead, told her that I loved her, and left the room. I told my wife about the bone fairy and how Lily was scared of it, and my wife also agreed that it was just something that one of the kids in her class had made up. That was the last this mysterious fairy was mentioned that evening, until we were awoken by Lily later that night. "Dad, I just saw it. It was in my room," Lily yelled as she came running into our bedroom at 3 in the morning. I jumped awake and quickly sat up. I processed what she had just yelled out to me and instantly became wary, thinking that someone was inside the house. I jumped out of bed and slowly crept towards Lily's bedroom. I made it to the doorway and slowly poked my head around to look inside the room to see if I could see anyone in there. It was empty. There was no one in there. "Who was in your room, sweetheart?" I asked my daughter, still thinking that there may be someone inside the house. "The bone fairy," she replied. The fear in her voice was evident. I saw her flying out of the window. She was really here. I let out a sigh of relief. Of course, that's what she had seen. I knew that it was probably just a mix of fear and her own imagination that led Lily to being able to see the bone fairy. I told her that no one was in her room and walked into the bedroom and looked around to show her that no one was in there with her. I could tell that she was still scared, so both me and my wife decided that she could sleep in our bed for the night. The next morning over breakfast I asked Lily if she felt any better and if she slept okay in our bed. She said that she did feel better and that she felt a lot safer in our bed and not in her own. We then ate our cereal and soon we were talking and laughing about other things like Lily's favorite cartoon, The Bosco Show, and what she would be doing at school that day. I noticed that Lily was eating cereal with her left hand that morning, even though she is right-handed, and made a slight joke about it. She didn't seem to find it too funny and looked down into her bowl. I apologized for making the joke and she seemed to accept my apology because we were quickly back to normal. The rest of the day passed by with no mention of the bone fairy, and I thought that maybe it wouldn't be mentioned again. Well, I hoped that it wouldn't, but come bedtime Lily was scared again and said that she wanted to sleep in our bed for the night again. I told her that it was probably best that she tries to stay in her own bed tonight. I told her that if she were scared again later in the night, then she could come into our bed once more. She then agreed to try her best and stay in her own bed. She did manage to stay in her own bed for most of the night, but once again at 3 in the morning she came running into our room again, waking us up. "Mom! Dad! She's back!" I saw her looking at me through the window. Lily screamed as she ran and jumped into our bed. "She wants my baby bones." My wife and I gave Lily a big hug and told her that everything was going to be okay, that she was safe now. It took a little while, maybe 20 minutes, to fully calm Lily down. But we managed, and soon she was asleep between me and my wife. We looked at each other and we didn't even need to say a word. We knew from the look in each other's eyes that we needed to do something about this, but we didn't know what. I rolled over to try and go back to sleep, but thoughts of what to do about this problem were circling in my mind. I must have dozed off though, because I awoken by a small scratching sound coming from the end of the bed. At first I thought it might have been Lily, but I looked down and saw that she was still fast asleep next to me. It was dark in the room and so I couldn't see anything, but I could definitely hear it. A faint scratching sound and then what sounded like a small footstep. I blinked a few times, trying to let my eyes adjust to darkness. I then heard another footstep, then another. I then heard the sound of rushing air, like something was beating its wings. By now, my eyes were beginning to adjust to the blackness. I could make out the outline of a fairly small figure. It may have been only 2 or 3 feet tall. I could see that it had the body of a person, but it had 2 large wings sprouting from its back. The wings were making the sound of rushing air, as they flapped up and down, and the figure was beginning to float off of the floor. I saw the figure rise higher and higher off of the ground, and it then flew towards the window. I don't remember too much of what happened next, but I do remember 2 piercing, yellow eyes turn around and look directly at me. I could also see in this figure's hand was a small object. It was hard to see this object in the darkness, but I knew exactly what it was. It was a bone. I don't remember anything after that. I just remember waking up the next morning and looking around and seeing my wife and daughter still asleep in the bed with me. I thought everything I had seen must have been a dream. The thoughts of the bone fairy must have been overtaken my mind and seeped into my dreams. I breathed a sigh of relief and let out a small laugh because I knew how ridiculous this all was. The thought that had been scared of a story that was probably meant to scare children made me laugh. I laid in bed for another few minutes before I heard Lily stir awake. She laid there awake for a second before she looked up at me and said, "Dad, my finger hurts." As she said this, she held out the index finger on her right hand. I looked down at it and it appeared to be normal. I couldn't see any cuts or bruises on it anywhere. "Where exactly does it hurt?" I asked her, and she pointed to the middle of her index finger. I told her to tell me if it hurt when I touched her finger, and I lightly touched her finger. She immediately screamed in pain and pulled away her hand. As soon as I had touched her finger, though, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't the fact that she was in pain that concerned me so much. It was that when I felt her finger, it felt a lot softer and squishier than it should have, like there was nothing solid in it. That's how we ended up in the doctor's, looking up at the X-ray that they had taken of my daughter's hand. "Wow, I have never seen anything like it," the doctor said while he was looking at the X-ray. It didn't take a doctor to see what was wrong, though. Even me, someone who has no medical knowledge at all, knows that there are supposed to be bones in all of your fingers. So, it was very disturbing to look at the X-rays and see that inside my daughter's right index finger, there were absolutely no bones at all.